Tell me about that engine, that economy engine. Tell me what kind it was, how big it was, and describe the parts, the workings of it.
Well, it was a pretty good sized rig. It was a cast iron deal. It had two big drive wheels on it. On one side had a pulley to put a belt on, and on the other side is just plain, and it had a shaft that there was a deal on this camshaft that the rod was hooked to, that it worked this shaft that worked this magneter, and that thing made every other circle it made, this plunger tripped that magneter, which made a spark, and it was hooked up to a plug, and of course it had two valves in the head, and it pumped gas in there just like a car, and that magneter fired it.
Well, did you say it had a thing on top that you put the oil in, the oil?
Yeah, up on top of the water tank there was a glass bulb container that you put the oil in, hold about a half a quart of oil, and there was a pipe hooked to it and went all the way down through that water tank into the housing around the cylinder, and it just dripped oil, and the rod, connection rod that was hooked to this cylinder and around the crankshaft that these two drive wheels was on, it had a pan that you poured oil in that, and it was called a drip oil. It wasn't a drip, it was a, what did they call it? Come around and this rod went in this oil, and it got his rod through oil through that.
And then the motor was water cooled. It had a water tank on it.
Yeah, the water tank was built on top of the bed of the engine. They called it the bed. And inside that bed was a gas tank. And this water tank would come up and went all the way around this cylinder wall, and water come way up over the top of it. About, best I remember, the water tank held about 5 gallons of water.
And it was a 7-horse economy.
It was a 7-horse economy engine.
Tell me what the engine was used for. What did
we used it to grind corn. They called it a grist mill. It had a 16-inch set of rocks, and they first tried a 24-inch set, and that was so big it couldn't pull it. And they discarded that, and he ordered them smaller rocks from Sears Roebuck, and they were 16-inch across.
What about those stones that were used on the grist mill? Explain to me how these stones were You told me the other day that some stones laid flat, but these stood up.
One of them was stationary, and the other one turned. It was mounted on a shaft that went through the one that was stationary, and it would turn and move backwards and forward. And it had a wheel, adjustment wheel. When they started this engine up and got it started rotating, the corn was up here in the hopper. Well, it had what they called a shoe that corn went down in, and it worked backwards and forward, and the corn went out of it into a tunnel deal down into these rocks. And they controlled the speed of that engine with the corn that fed into it. If you put too much corn in there, it'd stall the engine. And there was just so much corn, it was just continuously going in there, and the meal was continuously coming out. It had a spout on the side of this rock frame, and we had a box built to catch the meal, and the sack hung on the end of the box. And they had what they call a scoop. It was actually a little old box deal with a handle on it. You'd dip that meal up and pour it in a sack. And when that guy's meal corn was ground out, they cleaned out the meal that was in the box, and then moved that sack out and put the other feller's sack up there. But this chute that come out of them rocks had a deal on it you could let down and cut the meal off. The meal would still be a grinding back there in the rocks, and then the compartment that come into that box that caught the meal.
Well, how did Uncle John generally take pay for grinding people's corn?
For toll corn, for grinding a bushel, he taken a gallon. He got 1 gallon of shell corn out of it to grind a bushel. And when that bushel of corn was ground into meal, it filled that sack just as full or fuller than it was with corn. I can't tell you how that could happen, but after the corn was ground, it puffed up and almost overfilled the sack.